Welcome back to Selling Circular, the podcast dedicated to exploring the innovative minds and business models shaping our transition to a circular economy. I'm Gar Punnett, CEO of LoopLayer.
I'm Sabir Al-Khani, VP of Product at SpareTech, and today we're diving into a really lovely conversation where we get to learn what happens when designers flip the script on how furniture is made.
Yeah, we're talking with Justin Beetzel. Sorry, Justin, we didn't get the pronunciation. And Fernando Ramirez, also, I think I got that one, but maybe not, from Common Object Studio. And let me tell you, these guys aren't really just your typical designers. They've done something that most people in the industry would consider either brave or completely insane, is they actually stopped designing. They weren't designing for an entire year. And with that, they got some insights.
So instead of actually working with their hands and thinking about the furniture they were going to build, instead they went upstream, and they kept going upstream in the supply chain to understand where source materials come from and what that means from a waste perspective in the world of furniture. So they were visiting farms, meeting sheep, essentially becoming supply chain detectives. And this journey led them to create Okaterra, which it started as this exploration, this design and supply chain exploration, and now it's evolved into a full-fledged furniture brand that is challenging everything we know about sustainable design.
I wonder what in our careers, if we're doing something right, is going to sort of let us go meet sheep and go be on a farm. Maybe we got to do some sort of...
I agree with you.
Exactly. Maybe we could do some sort of regenerative ag in the field type thing. Yes. We got to go talk to some sheep. What struck me most about this conversation was actually when Justin mentioned that he didn't really realize how much of design choices that they were making was actually forcing more monoculture into the world by demanding conformity of design. And so think about that for a second. That means every time we expect our furniture to look exactly the same, we're actually driving decisions all the way back to the sheep that get raised on the farms.
Yeah, I mean, that's wild, right? And like, speaking of sheep,
literally.
I mean, this is so good. You'll hear in the episode about Melissa, a farmer in Pennsylvania who's become what Fernando calls a part of the Okaterra family. She's raising a diverse flock of sheep specifically because diversity reduces parasites and eliminates the need for antibiotics, which we've learned about in like science, right? We know that diversity is healthy. And so anyway, it's like, I'm like, this whole insight about monoculture was so important for me. It's like, it goes against everything we know about keeping a healthy planet. Anyway, so what happens with the wool that doesn't make the cut for traditional textiles? That's what's becoming acoustic panels and chair cushions for other products.
So the materials list alone is refreshingly simple. I think I actually remember us being like feel so much peace in how much sort of what these materials are made out of, what these products are made of. We're talking wool, wood, hemp, and linseed oil. That's pretty cool. So as Justin puts it, if their furniture fell off a truck, the birds would love it. It means they just get to pick it apart and use it for whatever they want to. But here's the kicker. Now they're in the game of trying to prove this out and actually try to scale this. We talk about scale a little bit in the episode, that as they're trying to partner with some of these biggest furniture companies in the world to prove that this isn't just some niche experiment.
And that matters and has an impact in the upstream supply chain, right? So we talk about how they're going to build a network of farmers where they believe that transparency might be the future of sustainability claims, and that when you're able to design with intention and understand where your materials come from, and that they're not going to be perfect and monoculture product, that's kind of a future that can be scalable if we have that level of acceptance. So Fernando shares that you can literally know the sheep's name of where your wool comes from. That's how upstream they've gone.
I want those imperfections. But let's get those wormholes, those nail marks. Let's get it all in there. This is a powerful message, especially when you connect it back to what Fernando said about these natural materials that are connecting us to our humanity. I feel like we're going to have this humanity theme. As we just get more AI, we're just going to be getting more and more human themed in this.
Stay centered.
Yes, exactly. So he kind of said, you'll hear it in the episode, he's like, why can we just stare at a fire for hours? There's something primal about this, natural about connecting us to materials that we've been touching for all of humanity, all of human existence.
So let's have a great conversation to think about design, sustainability, and the nature of product perfection or perfect products. And you'll hear this in the episode. The most sustainable thing that you could do is embrace the weird, celebrate variation, and I get to say this, you can trust the beauty that comes in many shades of brown. Let's get to it.
I love, Justin, that you got some props behind you, and that can sort of delineate really the work that you all do on building some really cool, I don't know what to call it. I mean, great designs, but what would you call the objects behind you? And then how do you delineate what those are versus all the other work you do with, and this is the Okaterra line. Okaterra
hmm
line is what I'm
hmm
talking about behind you, right?
Yeah, exactly. We do a lot of work for large companies. Fernando and I, before we started Common Object, we were really into helping other studios, helping brands build. And one thing we realized was like, especially with these larger companies, we couldn't get uh it's so hard to get the briefs that we wanted to like to really try to dive into sustainability in a way that we thought we could. And so we said, well, like that's kind of on us. Like we can do a case study and see what happens. So this project started about 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 now, and it was really around like, hey, as a studio, can we push ourselves to create some objects that give back more than they take? It was this question around like we started looking into regenerative agriculture and what was happening in the food industry, and asked like, okay, what could happen from that starting point? And then can we use that as a way to show where we think design and furniture industry can be pushing into around that? So it was a really great exploration. Took a lot of work to get the initial pieces set up of finding regenerative farmers basically to say, can we use the amazing materials that you're growing on your farms locally and get that into the contract furniture industry. And that's where Okaterra came from. We've built that up over the last while, really focused on supply chain and like, how do you start with that as like this, we call it just like a palette of materials that we can then build great designs off of. Fernando, I don't know if you want to go into it a little deeper, but yeah, that's the brand Okaterra kind of grew out of that over the last 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to just reimagining how a system can create something. At its core, that's really what we're doing, and I think our work just in general at Common Object or with Okaterra so far was just looking at all the pieces that design can touch, and then just kind of asking, can that expand out? How far back can we go? When we started, it wasn't. We weren't like thinking, well, we're going to redo a supply chain. We're not supply chain guys, so we definitely learned a lot, and it kind of felt through exploration, through kind of going through meeting with all the farmers and everything. It really was about. It took us all the way back to like where the material began. So it was
hmm
really organic.
Well, then I know before Sabira steps in and jumps on the systemic part of this. So then I want to like kind of double down on real quick aspect that's the obvious. What exactly are we looking at behind Justin? Explain it either to the viewers and to the listeners, because what I'm seeing are these giant leaf-like structures that seem
Yeah.
like they would be like acoustic paneling
Oh,
of
you
some
got
sort.
it. Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
So what you're seeing behind us is the acoustic side of where we're growing, and it's using waste wool as from our farms in Pennsylvania to create sound absorption. And what we did was this was released, I guess, a year ago now with Hayworth at their design lab as an experiment in what we could do. So these are acoustics. We've also done lounge pieces. We've done, you saw some little side tables, but it's all around using
Got it.
waste materials from from the local agriculture spaces, and also waste wood from Baltimore. So it's really about like can the starting point inform then all of these other objects that come out of it. Yeah, but yeah, these are acoustic panels. They would be like lined up in an office space around a lounge, and they work pretty well. It's nice. Like wool has such amazing sound, and also fire resistant qualities. And there's over 200,000 tons of it just like thrown away every year because it doesn't meet grade. So we're saying like, how do we pull that material stock into furniture?
Yeah, that is my favorite fiber. I know that might be kind of a nerdy thing to say, but yeah, for a lot of those reasons that, yeah, no, for sure. Then one more, Sabira here. That's 100% grown, which is what I think, right? That's
Yes.
what you all were claiming. I
Yes.
just thought you'd get a kick out of that, Sabira.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Not me. Well, I mean, I have so many questions. So then tell it. I think the fascinating about the design process that you're talking about is like you still have like a user need to be met, like something that
Yes.
you're working with Hayworth is like one of the biggest furniture companies in the world, and so like they're serving that end customer need. So like how do you match that and bridge that and take on the responsibility of going beyond what your competitors would do, which is just find the material in the last tier of the supply chain. Right now you're going 1, 2, 3 degrees, maybe more upstream, and
Yeah.
that's like a lot more work. So I'm curious, like maybe it's like a two-parter. How did you pick where to start in terms of what product, and how did that inform where you went upstream, or was it vice versa? You went upstream and that helped inform the downstream. Tell us a little bit about like the marrying of the design and the sustainability inquiry process.
Yeah. Well, we definitely went upstream first, right? We created a rough framework, and we honestly we kind of knew we were going to head towards a chair. And on the design side, that makes a lot of sense, right? That it's an object that is both technical. It's a design object that I think people really understand from both sides, whether it be the commercial industry like Hayworth or even like residential. So, direct to consumer. So we knew we wanted to start probably that, but our framework was really loose at first. We knew this was going to be a project around learning. So definitely when it comes to the design, I love Justin always says that is like, we set up the whole system first, right? And we didn't put pen to paper until 1 year in, because really what that was understanding who are all the partners in our network that can achieve something like this. And for a designer, that takes a lot of restraint not to not to start like creating, right? But we understood if this was going to be a system that was intentional and thoughtful, that we had to go through these steps. We had to lock all that in place. We had to make sure it worked so we could feel comfortable making some of these claims. We're still not completely comfortable. We always say a road to regeneration. You know, we're careful, and we're getting our certifications now. So I think some things we feel more comfortable claiming. But yeah, definitely we had to be led there. It was all about learning first.
well, what I hear in that too immediately is that you all kind of did turn into supply chain guys. Like you kind of did need to look at that supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, we're loosely. It feels
Loosely.
like,
Yeah.
but
Tangentially.
yeah, what we are pushing, and this maybe relates back to our design studio Common Object, and what we've said we want to do is like we believe sustainability comes in the exploration of the supply chain, and it was through that, like it wasn't like we weren't thinking about where this could go. We were doing a lot of like tiny experiments, sewing experiments with
Yeah.
the materials, and
Mhm.
trying to like, what does like suspension look like in an all bio-based chair, right? And so we went to
Mhm.
museums, like looking at historical pieces, and it's like there was a lot of exploration that happened. And then when we had everything in place, then we said, okay, here are the materials, here are the technology that we can use, and
Mhm.
then we trust ourselves as designers to create beautiful, usable objects from anything. Like that's what we
Yeah.
kind of have to trust ourselves in, I think, a little more as designers, versus a lot of times we ask design processes, you start at that user need. I mean, which you always have to have that in mind, but often it comes at the cost of the supply chain and the materials at the end of the process. So it's more about like what's the mix up, the merger that can happen just a little bit
Mhm.
earlier on.
Yeah, and I think from the beginning, it really was, and I think we do this with every project, to be honest. What's the impact we're trying to make? And then we figure out those steps along the way, right? Because when we work with a large company, yeah, it is much different, right? That they're some are more uncomfortable with it, some are willing to be pushed, X. So I think we have to. There's an evaluation period, but when you think about it, that translates exactly to what we did with Okaterra. And actually, Okaterras to us are like purest case study, but we're doing this actively with different projects.
And so I guess maybe just on the material, when you went upstream, you found wool, and there's maybe sounds like there's other materials and technologies that you discovered as being wasted or like a candidate for regenerative material. Yeah, how did you zero in on what that short list is? And are you still going and trying to discover more? Or now you have a list and you're working on it?
Yeah, that list was definitely we should pull up our Miro board sometime, but it's a
It's messy.
extensive we had probably boards and boards of just like what are potential materials. And I think what we asked was there's a lot of like sexy sustainable materials out there. And we realized though that just because it's a new thing doesn't mean that it's always the right way to go. And we asked more of like, okay, there's these kind of ancient proven
Mhm.
technologies that we have at our fingertips that aren't being utilized. And we can clearly see people are using like regenerative practices and, from hemp to wool to flax, to
Mhm.
there's a lot out there that are right now available and going to waste. So I think that was the harder part for us was like, how do we put that in a modern context
Mhm.
versus, and even like the idea of regenerative design is ancient, like it's part of indigenous culture, right? Like
Mhm.
none of this stuff is new, but it's more about the framing of it that we think is the important work that we need to do now.
Yeah, the
So
history and modern context.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, then in that framing, I mean, a lot of that has to do with then also the sales element of design and
Mhm.
bringing a vision to someone who can appreciate what you're trying to bring to them. How does that play into this? I mean, a little bit, and this kind of gets to Justin what you were saying, Fernando, a little bit of what you were saying as well of presenting these designs also then does require the client to embrace what you're trying to bring.
Mhm.
What is that give and pull like in the design world? You're a little bit beholden to what they think they need, but you're also expected to give them the unexpected or something that's magical and changes their perception. How do you balance those when you're also trying to bring sustainability into the picture?
That's a good one.
Do you want me to tackle that one, Fernando? Because that
Yeah,
one's
you can go for it.
I expect both.
you could give,
Again,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. We,
No,
we
no.
both have answers, but go.
I mean,
But
like
that.
it is a good one because we both said this, like we want to be building joy into this world. Like
Mhm.
I think that's our role as designers is like, bringing excitement and desirability and like, uh, I don't see it as a conflict, I guess, in the way that I
Mhm.
used to, maybe. And I think the the piece that for me gets exciting about when I all of a sudden when I have this like this I'll say materials and supply chain that I really believe in, all of a sudden it frees me up to design in a way that maybe I wasn't able to before because I'm like, oh, I can just make something beautiful from this. I can just make something that's
Mhm.
exciting. And it's not that I don't have to worry about the repercussions, but it's like, oh no, I know that I'm supporting these farmers by doing this. I know that I'm creating meaningful change in this industry in some way by creating something that's gorgeous or that meets a need in some way. And it kind of changed my framing a bit around design. But that's just me personally. And then I do think though, on the sales side, it is a like really hard sell to tell somebody you're going to pay more for this because it's sustainable, right? And so I think
Mhm.
we've realized we need to meet the market. Um, like the designs that we do, we need to say that was a big part of our discussion was where can the market support this kind of materiality and this kind of change that needs to happen? And there's like contract furniture is one that we see as being able to support it, right? Like the
Mhm.
places that are, and there's a desire for these stories there. As long as you're not going, above the cost of these other places. I think we can hit those. Is what we're seeing kind of over and over again. Is like
Mhm.
we're about on par with the
Mhm.
cost of a lot of the other contract brands that are out there, which is nice. If we were trying to sell it to like a low end residential furniture, it'd be a harder thing. It would be a
Yeah.
much harder sell. So anyway, I think that's part of it. But Fernando, what's your answer?
No, I mean, I think me and you are pretty aligned with that. But I will say when we think about sales, the whole thing was about having a little foresight, right? That to say like we have to grow into this. We have to be a little bit ahead. We know how we want to present it. We know transparency. We believe in transparency. So you bring in your values as well. Like, all right, we could call this sustainable. We can call this regenerative. We can call it anything. But really at the end of the day, I think what we want for the future is something transparent and say, hey, you decide, is this enough for you? Is this the sustainability you want to be a part of? And we believe that we hope that that's the future at least. So when we think about sales, I think the designers or the people that this resonates most with are the ones that are starting to move over to like, we want something really sustainable. We want something that's kind of, we could have all the certifications in the world, right? But we could tell you where your tree fell if you like. We could tell you the sheep's name that your wool comes from if you like. Our transparency is so radical right now that, yeah, I mean, I think when we started working with our Declare label, I mean, they looked it over and they're like, you guys are carbon neutral already. You're you're already hitting kind of like that middle. So because of that, you could look at this and you decide, does this fit your definition of sustainability versus another company, right? So I think that transparency, maybe that's not as clear with sales, but I do think that is what we believe in. And we think the industry will eventually catch up to it.
And disclaimer, we don't have our carbon numbers fully.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I
we're
always
working we're
proper.
working on it
Yeah.
though.
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
mean,
Yeah.
That's why I said
well,
they said.
well, yeah, we didn't get into like the specific materials, but I'm curious if you can like shed some light on like what are the materials that you've used. And I mean, just to build on what you're saying, like you're the Okaterra furniture, right, is 100% biodegradable. Like that's where part of where some of the like carbon neutrality is coming from. Part of it's from like what your supply chain looks like. But yeah, to like help us go into like bring the listener into like what are we talking about? Like what is the furniture made of? How is it biodegradable? How did you achieve this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the furniture's made of pretty, like, it sounds boring, right? Like, it's like wool, wood, hemp, uh, linseed oil, right? Like, those are the ingredients of this. And
Those all seem pretty pronounceable.
they're very pronounceable. And
That's generally a good sign.
yeah, right. Those are, and I think that's why it feels a little bit like we said, like we're like, oh, how do we make, like, it's exciting to us, but also it's just a bit of like, how do we minimize the act of like reducing as much as we can from
Mhm.
this, right? So we talk about it though in like biodegradability is such a term, right? That's out there, and it's like, well, what does that mean? So we're looking at it as like we want to create all of our materials that if this would fall off a truck, the birds would love it. Like that's what we talk
Mhm.
about. And we're not talking about biodegradability as in like throw this in your composter and it's gonna, you know, be gone shortly. It's like, no, like these are all nature's building blocks that we
Mhm.
have at our fingertips. Like this will, if this goes back into nature in some way, it will find its way back to nature,
Yeah.
right? Very, very quickly, like a log would, right? In
Mhm.
the woods. So yeah, we really focused on our Declare label. You can take a look at that too, but it's like really just focusing on all the materials that go into this, completely red list free and fully having a bio-based story in it. So it's a lot of like woods that are from our local area. And that means that they are from fallen lumber here in Baltimore. A lot of our lumber would have gone to landfill, and that means that it has, markings in it. It might have like nail holes. It might have wormholes in it. And for us, we really wanted to celebrate that as a thing to be celebrated, not to be thrown away. So that's a little different with those pieces. With the hemp, it's a lot of ropes that we're using for suspension in our chairs. So when you sit on our Oka chair, you have a layer of a cushion that's made of waste wool, and then you have denser wool inside of that that's compact together. And then underneath it is a suspension of hemp that's woven with rope just to create a little bit of bounce as you sit down into it. And that's the basic makeup of the chair. We then wrap that in a more modern aesthetic. And Fernando, I think you can talk about materials well there too.
Well, I think it's good to note that those materials, I mean, once we had them, that's 6 months of different ways of filling it. That's 6 months of trying to figure out suspension. That's 6 months of, that was 6 months of us experimenting with these materials that we knew, but kind of going back, like he was saying earlier, we referenced history, but at the same time, we said, okay, in modern context, like how does that actually perform now? So that took a lot of experimentation. But yeah, with the materials, I think overall, we decided early on, we have some mycelium in here. My office kind of smells. We always have weird stuff in our studios. But we had all these materials, but we understood from coming from the industry, from work with big companies, we understood how hard it is to get those materials into the companies. So I think we wanted to really start with, what's like a next step in sustainability? What could that really look like? What's something that's both familiar but new? And I think when we talk about like helping companies take steps towards sustainability, that's a little bit what we're talking about as well, is like, all right, what are the digestible things? What are the things we could start to introduce now, right? Or what are the things that we could introduce in the future? And I think with Okaterra, that really shows like you could take, not all wood sourcing is equal, right? So I think showing that intentionality through all these materials, I think it really shows, you could do something familiar, but just better.
Yeah.
Well, that speaks to, I mean, something about you using the word digestible kind of sparked literal, like kind of appetite. Like, what's the client's appetite for what they understand, and then how you can push that boundary increasingly over time of that
Yeah.
sustainability. Justin, you had a thought there?
Well, I was just going to add also, like on Fernando talking about like not all wood is equal, right? And I think to us, the wool part of it is also one that really sparked it for us. Our farmer, we work with at the moment, like we're working with one farmer in Pennsylvania. Her name's Melissa, and she has this like incredible appetite for making her farm like the best for her land that she can. Like it is. And so for us, it was like, oh, we found this partner who has the same level of care for her supply chain as we do for our supply chain. And it was just about like, it's connecting the dots to people who really care and want to get in the weeds and really figure this out. So for her, she's all about diversity in her flock. So all of her sheep, that she wants as much color as she can, because that reduces parasites. It reduces the amount of types of antibiotics, or she doesn't need to do any antibiotics, right? She's fully organic, and it lets her farm be more biodiverse, like have more biodiversity on the farm.
Resilient too.
Right.
Yeah.
More resilient, exactly, in so many ways. And so she's so focused on that. And you realize like is that nuanced. And I think there's beauty in that, but it takes storytelling to get that from there the whole way to the person buying it. Right.
Yes.
Like, how do you bridge that gap? And I think that's the piece that we're really, just to be honest, it's a struggle to say, to tell the story. Once you get somebody's attention fully into that, it's like, I get it. Like, it clicks. But it is like, we're realizing that that is our hurdle that we're really working on right now, is making that next leap.
I mean, isn't that
Yes.
always, well, not always, maybe not always the case, but I find that very common in our industry, where you all have to lead with some big value prop, but have all the layers ready for some sort of client or consumer to dig one level deeper as they see fit, but you need that headline. And then they essentially go, oh, have they thought about that? Oh, they did think about this. Have they thought about, oh my gosh, they thought about that too. And to continue that journey themselves is so critical to that process of communication of what is complex sustainability, complex circular economy thought.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, like thinking about that at scale too, right? Like you're working with the Hayward, like that's also blowing my mind a little. You're talking about Melissa and the farm and that like unique connection.
Mhm.
But I'm curious also, like, how do you, like, Gar, you're talking about, you have like different customers asking for maybe different things and different levels of curiosity. And then are these customers pressuring you to deliver more? Or like, how do you know, like, what the right size of your operation to, in order to meet
Yeah,
the
that's
customer where they're at?
Fernando, do you want to clarify the Hayworth piece of
well, I
it?
know it was
Yeah,
an exploratory
yeah,
sort of,
with Hayworth, absolutely. Yeah, it was exploratory.
but I mean, Sabira's point. I mean, at what point do they go, but we want more? Give us more. And then how do you
Well,
how,
we can answer that. Yeah, essentially, like one, we've when we started, we talked to a handful of farmers, right? And a lot of this, they each contributed to where we got because although Melissa is like, I always say she's a third part of Okaterra pretty much because she's done so much. All those farmers kind of led us to where we were going. And, when we talk about waste wool, we call that waste wool because they call it waste wool, but it's still super valuable. And like we said, that really came about by having these discussions and seeing that a lot of this waste wool is just sitting around. It's sitting in barns, or it's spread out, or it's burned. But how we're kind of looking at it now, like even we're actively starting another network in Michigan right now. We have a grant to do that. We're going to be working with some people that you're very familiar with. And then, some other folks up here. We're part of Pennsylvania Fiber Shed. We're going to actually tap into Michigan Fiber Shed now to kind of help us grow the network up here in Michigan. So we're going to start expanding that. That takes time though, right? And it also takes a farmer being like, you're going to do what with my wool? Like, you know, uh, we have to find the right partners. But yeah, we have farmers we've talked to, other like, back in PA and Maryland area, but also we're actively going to start trying to grow this in Michigan as well. So we are looking to expand. How do we serve more people? And really that is the goal of when we turned Okaterra from a case study into a business. It was saying, okay, this can make a real impact. I think there was a point where we're like, we've done all this work and investigation. Like, should this move over into an actual business? And we knew that, all right, we're going to have to set up a larger network to be able to supply these large companies.
That is. Oh,
go
sorry.
for it, Justin.
No, I was gonna say
please.
that our goal is to scale up in that way. Like we think this is a very scalable thing. And actually, like just to shout out some people doing some good work, Room and Board just released a fully bio-based chair using a lot of the like a similar supply chain to what we're doing. And we saw that and we could have been like, oh man, but it's like, no, they're proving the point. Like this is scalable in a big way. Like, so I think it's exciting. We feel like we're part of a movement towards this in some way, but there are a lot of hurdles still in the like scaling up and finding the farmers to supply a Hayworth is different than finding the farmers to supply us.
Yes.
Right. And so, I think that is the hard work over the next year and a half with this grant is like kind of trying to prove that out. But what we found too is like, with Hayworth, we just released, they have a sister brand or a brand underneath them called Buzzy Space. And our studio worked with them. And what I loved was that we used that exact same starting point of saying, okay, before the design brief is even here, like what are the properties you're trying to create from this, which was no glues, no foams. And that came out of the explore, like they saw this at Neocon and said, hey, we want to do a project with you all. And so with them, we now released a new system that is using fully recycled like jean shoddy, like the insulation. in replacing their
Cool.
foam. And, so it felt like we can take this thinking and apply it to a lot of different places. It doesn't have to be wool. It can be, there's so many materials out there, right, we can do that with.
I mean, my big next question out of this, and also I want to point out to the listener, yes, I learned a new word of fiber shed, which again makes total sense, and that what a cool concept that again we're thinking that as sort of these supply levels of similar to water. Listener, think of a watershed.
Yes.
Yes. But when thinking about these materials, so I'm going to try to make a connection here that could be wrong, and please correct me. When I look at the products behind you, I see that they are not the same. They're made differently, and where that my mind takes me on that is, and for the listener, again, there's different aspects of this that we'll post online that you can see how they're constructed differently. But that speaks to material uniformity. That speaks to when you're working with supply chains that aren't uniform, they're typically waste products that aren't all the same. When we're working at the corporate high levels, typically things are homogenized so that they are easier, quote unquote, to work with. What lessons have you learned along the way in working with non-homogenized material or these waste products that maybe work differently for one sort of unit of supply than the other unit of supply? What lessons have you learned, and what would you tell other people that might be interested in this?
Man, that's so good. You're like
Yeah, that's point number one, I think, on our slide deck when we present to people. I'm sorry, Justin, go ahead. You could.
No, I was just going to say, like, we as designers and I say designers broadly, as product designers, as architects, as interior designers, I didn't realize how much I was forcing a monoculture in the world by demanding conformity and like I didn't realize how much what I was doing until now. I'm looking and I'm like so much of our world is thrown away because the parameters are so small. And so when I talk to other architects and designers who might spec our work in some way, like we're kind of asking them, can you open that window, like that band of variation just a little bit more? Because that drives the whole way down to the person taking care of the sheep, right? The whole way down to the person in the field. And I think there's beauty in right now, if you buy a completely undyed version of Okaterra, right? We will give you brown, and that brown, you can hold up two of them and you're like, oh, they're both brown. There's slightly different shades of brown there, right? And, we see that as beauty. We see that as like, oh, it's the natural color kind of coming through there. But you have to have somebody also designing with that parameter. And I hope that that's kind of, Fernando and I both teach one class at a college every year. And we're like, oh, I hope this is percolating down into the new designers as we're working up. Like this variety is part of the story of sustainability. Because I don't know, Fernando, you want to talk about some of the variation that we've seen or
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of covered it, but I think what you might have seen at Metropolis when we were at NeoCon, if you took a moment and looked down at those, it's like Justin was saying, it was very different kind of browns everywhere, and like he was saying, that's very intentional. We want people to really embrace variation. That's what we always, that's kind of our point. But that goes down to as you sculpt the leg, right? And that there's going to be variation, not only maybe not just wormholes, maybe it's a little bit an imperfect piece of wood. How does your design kind of consider that each piece that you're going to have to do? We did ICFF, which is a furniture show in New York. We were curated by a group called the Rockwell Group in New York, and we had our chairs come out of production, and one of them was oxidized completely. It was silver. So the chair was all like a beautiful white oak. And then the whole leg was just a real dark oxidation. And we were like, oh man, is that too far? And we sent it off to them and they were like, that's your story. That's why we curated you. Like bring it. And it is really, designing with that intention, we trust ourselves, but also there's moments where we're like, okay, how far can we actually push can we push it, right? We say familiar, like I was saying earlier, digestible, but we definitely kind of get to those edges. But I think what that taught us, that moment, was we should trust ourselves. And like embracing variation means that, like, oh, we designed this thing to embrace that, right? We designed it to show that off.
Well, for me, that also is such an interesting dynamic of how far can you push a consumer or a client
Mhm.
to accept natural. And that's
Yeah.
such a bizarre concept that like that's what we're like defying. But Sabira, yeah, thoughts there?
Well, I was gonna say, like, this idea of variation is really fascinating to me. That you connected the dots to the farmer, and like you can go back to like Darwin's theory of evolution, right? Like you need the variation to have a sustainable ecosystem,
Yeah.
a resilient
Mhm.
ecosystem. And like why have we as a society, I mean, your point just like why is the band so narrow? Like what
Mhm.
happened that we we want such standardization instead of seeing the beauty in the variation? So I think that's something really like almost like a core principle that like I would want to shout more from the rooftops,
Mhm.
like me personally, is like we need to lean into the weird because like that's how we survive. Like hello, like this is what science has taught us, and we are
Mhm.
just ignoring it as a community, as a humanity, and that's kind of weird and fascinating. So like what a key for me, this is like a huge aha moment, and like thank you for
Well,
bringing that to
Yeah.
light. Like yeah, of
there's something
course, like we need to be doing
Yeah.
this.
Sabira might roll her eyes on this because I'm on a huge AI kick, maybe like all of society. But again, from the AI perspective, it's like all AI is going to do is take homogenous to the next level. Like it's
Mhm.
just going to absolutely reduce everything
Totally.
to
Yep.
looking the same so that it can be as reproducible as possible. But
Mhm.
this defies that. And this is the humanity in these choices, I think, are what the most important aspect of design is going to be.
Also goes back to kind of, it reminds me of I always say, like, when we sit around a fire, we like we hit a primal side in us, right? Like, why can we always, no matter who you are, why can we stare at a fire for so long? And I think some of these things kind of touch on that, right? Touching natural materials. Yeah, like even like our first iteration of Okaterra, we made all of our own textile on it. We put that on everything, which we're still actively kind of playing with, but it just takes a lot longer. We're like learning about it. But yeah, I mean, this kind of connects to our humanity. These really natural materials, these things that humans have touched for most of existence. Yeah, it goes back.
Well, yeah, incredible work there. Sabira, you wanna round us out here on
Yeah,
usually our ending question here?
we're at the end of our time together, which flew by,
Okay.
but what gives you hope? I mean, you're doing such inspiring work. So, I mean, I'm finding that really like a hopeful thing, but what's been keeping your juices going?
It's a good one.
Ooh, I think what I've loved about getting into this side, yeah, it feels like I'm on a different side of design and furniture. Like there's the design side, which has a lot of, there's a lot of good and bad that happens on the design side. And then there's the sustainability side, and I'm sure it's the same for that. But like starting to find the people that are like champions of all this stuff has been really uplifting for us. Like every time we tell our story or find another person, it's like, oh, there are people collectively on the sourcing side of like on all sides of
Yeah.
this who are
Yeah.
pushing in this direction. And regardless of the winds of like our times, there are people who believe in this and are pushing for this. And that's exciting to me. I also, yeah, there's a lot more to do. And that gets me excited. Like it honestly does. And I keep seeing a lot of, like more opportunities coming up around this. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it for me that keeps me hopeful. It's just like the community that's being built,
Mhm.
around this work.
Yeah, me and Justin hang out too much because my answer is not that different. But I will say when we talk about common objects, we always say we were founded on sustainability and community. We both had connections to that way before. We were doing community work. We were doing work in sustainability. But I think I will go more zoomed in, maybe. I think what I find most hopeful is seeing the people we've worked with, people like Melissa, what we mentioned, that have given us her time, that has helped shape these things. We work with with some folks over in Kentucky as well, doing some of the
Oh.
felt loom.
Hmm.
Even that, like talking to these people, seeing their faces as they work through things. You know, our chair frames right now are made by a nonprofit in Baltimore who trains like local folks to kind of make furniture essentially. And like the first ICFF we went to, the furniture fair, you know, the guy who made the frame, he actually came up and he was like sitting there and he was super excited. And I think he'd only been at it for a few months at that point. And it was really, I think when I have those moments, or even like when I meet a designer or architect who's like, oh man, I've been looking for something like this. I think that gives me hope because I guess because it's so one-on-one. It's like,
There's the
this is like seeing the
Connection.
faces,
Yeah.
seeing the faces of the people that that are actually contributing to it and that are actually like part of maybe the movement that I hope will happen, right?
I love
I
that.
think that really excites me.
No, I love that because again, that speaks to that humanness. Well, Justin, Fernando, Common Object Studio, you guys are great. I'm so excited to keep
Rocking
looking and
it.
seeing more.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us here today.